Good evening and welcome. This is a meeting of the Special Education Advisory Committee of the Halton District School Board for Tuesday, May the 3rd, 2022. Given the need to practice social distancing due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're holding this meeting remotely through a video conference. The meeting is being recorded. In accordance with Ontario Regulation 463-97 and the guidelines effective February the 1st, 2021, any meeting of the Board of Trustees and/or committee meetings which are open to the public must be live streamed and be able to take questions from the public. The purpose is to foster two-way participation during these meetings. To comply with this, SEAC will be using a Google form, which is attached to each agenda, distributed in advance of the meetings and posted on the HDSB SEAC website page. Questions posed during the live stream meetings of SEAC may be answered during the meeting, particularly those related to the agenda items, or at the following meeting at the discretion of the chair. For efficiency, multiple questions received that are similar in nature may be grouped together at the discretion of the chair and/or vice chair. Questions will not be attributed. Notation will be made that multiple people ask the same question. Any questions that contain language that is hateful or discriminatory will not be considered. So first of all, we'll start with a roll call to record who's in attendance. And please could you answer yes or present as Lucille takes that roll call.
Hi, well, evening everyone. I will start with the trustees, and I know that we've had regrets from Tracy. Is Heather here?
My fellow trustees, Tracy, Heather, and Margot send their regrets. So I am standing in as a trustee rep tonight. Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Hi.
I'm now moving on to the associations. ABC. I did see Jen, but
Yarlene is sent her regrets.
Okay. And I'm present if you can hear me now, because I was having some tech difficulties.
We got you.
Autism Ontario, Lisa.
Present. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
And Community Living is Candace.
Present, thank you.
Easter Seals, I see Sarah.
Present. Good evening.
Melissa.
No, I don't see her.
I haven't seen her, no. Down syndrome, I think Sophia sent her regrets. And Rebecca.
Present.
Okay, then for learning disabilities, Alison.
Yes, I'm here.
And Diane.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone.
Evening. And then for voice, I'm looking for Erin. Erin's voice.
Erin sends regrets, but I'm here.
And
Kathy.
Welcome. And then for members at large, James.
Here.
Diane.
No, no.
And I'm here, Lucille. For school, I've got Colette.
Good evening.
Marta.
Good evening.
And Roxanna.
Good evening.
Sean.
Good evening, everyone.
Is there anybody that I've missed?
I have brought some staff with me today. Jay Chantavong, our manager of budget, and Jackie Sweetman, our general manager of finance.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
welcome everyone.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to begin by honoring the land. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Atawandaran, the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honour and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walk before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. So our first order of business tonight is to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting. Are there any modifications or amendments that need to be made to the agenda? I just have one, in that we have, rather than letters for 2.4, letters for YCDSB, there are actually letters from other boards as well. So it'll be letters from multiple boards rather than just from one board. Does anybody want to propose a motion to accept the agenda with that minor modification?
I'll propose, Alison. I'll
Okay,
propose a motion to accept the agenda.
great, thanks. And Lou, you're on mute.
I can second Rebecca Hearn.
Great. And does anybody oppose or want to abstain from supporting the agenda? Not seeing any. The agenda is unanimously passed. Next, we're going to seek approval of the April minutes. Are there any errors or omissions that anybody noted they'd like to bring to our attention? No? And Lou, if we look for somebody to approve.
Yeah, so I'll start again. Kathy, would you like to move a motion to approve the minutes?
Yep, I could do that.
Okay, and then maybe Jen.
Yeah, I was just going to say I can second that.
Great. And again, anybody want to oppose or abstain from a vote on the approval of the minutes? Please make themselves known. Okay, none being heard, the minutes are unanimously accepted as recorded. So now we're going to move on to the action items, and the first portion is going to be a presentation by Roxanna Nagoy and her team on the special education budget. So welcome, Roxanna, for your annual gathering here with SEAC. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having us this evening. And as I mentioned, Jay and Jackie are joining me today. They do a lot of the work, and their staff for putting together all the numbers that make up these slides. I'm going to try to see if I can share the presentation. Let's try this again.
So yeah, we have it.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I won't be able to see the screen and the meeting at this point when I'm presenting. So please interrupt me if there's any questions as we go through the slides. Would be happy to take questions throughout as well as at the end. The purpose of this presentation is to walk you through a very draft budget and some of the elements in particular as they relate to special education and where we are today. Please keep in mind all of these numbers are still in draft. They actually have been changing as we speak, and we're finalizing them for a draft budget presentation at the Committee of the Whole for next week. So for today's purpose, we wanted to give you a quick overview of the budget process and where we are in this process, some highlights of the stakeholder input received to date, then moving into the key elements of the budget, which are enrollment, revenue, and expenses, as well as a quick look at some of the pressures and challenges we see for the upcoming year. And of course, in terms of next steps, what are some of the key dates and timelines that we're working with. And if you were around this table last year, we did go into a bit more detail in terms of our reporting cycles and funding process and regulations. We've summarized it a little bit more for this presentation, and I'll just highlight some of the background just for context. So in regards to the budget development, we are aligning resources to the multi-year strategic plan priorities, as well as when we develop the annual operational plan and special education plan, they are developed with action items that keep in mind the availability or limitations of resources, respectively. The budget is also aligned to our corporate risk profile. The board has adopted a strategic enterprise risk management framework that evaluates on a consistent framework the risks, which could be both threats and opportunities, that have the ability to impact our success in terms of achieving our strategic priorities. Of course, the budget has to be accountable over the financial resources and meet all the regulatory compliance and reporting timelines. The budget process does start in December typically and goes all the way to June in the year before the start of the fiscal year for which it is intended. It starts with provincial level consultations, so the ministry consultations with the trustees, boards, the various associations have occurred during December and January. Our stakeholder consultation for the board has taken place through a budget survey during February and March. And then various sessions and discussions occur with both the superintendents, the departments, those budget holders, the senior team, and the board of trustees. This year, the grants for student needs, which represent most of our revenue from the province, have been released earlier than the usual. So they've been released in February with more details that helped us plan for next year. And during April and March, we have been working on all the budget input, the revenue, the expenses, putting it all together just to see where we are in terms of our financial position. Discussing a list of priorities and challenges, and conducting a budget session with trustees in April, with a more detailed session coming up next week. As I mentioned, the final budget approval, so the board budget goes to the Board of Trustees twice, the first week, the first meeting in June, and then again for approval at the second meeting in June, which I believe is June 15th this year. So a couple of the key highlights are outlined on this slide. And in terms of the feedback process, so the budget survey was available online and promoted through various social media and news, as well as through the student trustees and the student council, in order to increase the voice, the student voice in the input. It was open between February 18th and March 7th. We had almost 1,300 responses, and a more detailed report was presented to the Board of Trustees with the report on the results being appended at the April 6th meeting. As part of gathering input into the budget process, We're here today presenting to you and providing an opportunity for input into the budget session before it is being developed and finalized. This slide just provides a quick summary of what we've heard, some of the themes that we've heard in the budget survey, and they have been categorized by area of our strategic plan. What we've heard mostly is that there's a lot of support for supports for students, whether it's teachers, coaches, whether it's early intervention or learning intervention, whether it's mental health, special education, learning re-engagement. That probably has been the key theme that has come out under the various pillars in our strategic plan and the focus for the upcoming year. In addition to that, there have been comments regarding programs, co-curricular and extracurricular opportunities for students, access to more learning resources and technology, as well as opportunities for students to be involved with more interaction with Indigenous communities, as well as environmentally sustainable projects. And as I said, there's more details that have been provided and they're available on our public website under the April 6th Board of Trustees package. In terms of enrollment, the key driver of our funding is enrollment, in addition to other factors such as our geographic setting, the number of schools, the age of schools, square footage, etc., and demographic, socioeconomic factors from the census as it relates to the population of our region. With regards to enrollment, we've been a growth region year over year until the pandemic, and the prior year we've seen a decline and we've lost that growth momentum. We've noted on a provincial level that enrollment has been moving away from urban centers. So Halton is not the only board impacted. It's most urban boards that have seen a decline in enrollment or a decline in the growth in enrollment as families with school-age children have been moving quite outside of the urban centers with the ability to work remotely, as well as the affordability of housing. And we still have not seen that growth coming back into our system. So when we look at the projection for enrollment for next year compared to the original budget, we're expecting a little bit of a growth in both panels. However, when we are looking at the revised estimates numbers, which give us a more accurate picture in terms of where we are in this year. So by this point in time, for revised estimates, we have the October 31st enrollment, the actual enrollment. What we are seeing that next year, we expect a bit of a decline in the elementary panel and a bit more of an increase in the secondary panel. A lot of that being as a result of one large grade 8 moving into grade 9 and much smaller entry grades for full day kindergarten, replacing that. In terms of revenue, we, as I mentioned, get most of our funding from the province through grants for student needs. About 88.8% in this case for next year have been determined to be the proportion of our funding, and we call the grants for student needs, we refer to as GSN. Additional revenue include other provincial and federal grants, as well as school-generated funds. So about 2.3% of our budget represents school-generated funds through fundraising, as well as various extracurricular activities that may occur for which funding may be collected at the school level. A little bit of investment income depending on our cash position as well as the interest rates. That too has been decreasing year over year. And other revenues include mostly the deferred capital contribution that covers our amortization expense, as well as the education development charges, which is a levy that is imposed on new development. So as a growth board, we have a levy on new development per unit, whether it's residential or commercial, that allows us to collect revenue in order to purchase sites for new schools in areas of growth. So just a quick table, and we did mention in here, this is draft as of the last committee of the whole presentation. Since then, the numbers have changed slightly. So trustees will see the updated numbers next week, but for consistency and for the purpose of this meeting, we wanted to give you a little bit of a draft distribution of our revenue and year-over-year comparison. So we are comparing budget to budget as it is required in our financial statement regulations as well. So you will note that the grants for student needs, which is at the very top line, has gone up significantly since last year. That is as a result of increase in the centrally negotiated compensation and benefits mostly, as well as a little bit of that is the growth in enrollment. And some keeping up with costs, inflation factors that have been factored into some of the non-salary portion or allocations within that grant. In addition to that, there's been some grants that have been one time that have been rolled into the GSN, and I will talk to them next, which is also why the provincial grants other line is looking that it has decreased year over year, because some of that has moved into the line above. The provincial grants others are timed investments on an annual basis that we cannot make long-term commitments to. So they are more of a pilot grant, and they could change focus and eligibility. School-generated funds have been quite low over the pandemic. This doesn't really impact the bottom line of the budget, but we are estimating more of a pre-pandemic normal year, and we are going to budget for about 20 million in school-generated funds. On the other flip side, in expenses, we're going to just match the expenses because this is enveloped funding to be used by schools for the intended purposes for which it was fundraised. You will see the investment income also being reduced year over year as a result of cash flow, as well as a result of the interest rates. In our original prognosis for the budget that previous year, there was more cash on hand, less plans to purchase sites, as well as the interest rates potentially were expected to be better than they ended up being for the year. So what are the key highlights from year to year? We are looking at, in terms of revenue, more of a status quo funding from this current year into next year, which gives us more stability. And in addition to that, there's been some increases, as I mentioned, due to enrollment growth, salary and benefits benchmarks, and some grants being transferred in. So some of the grants that have been transferred in include areas of mental health for almost $1 million, as well as special education investments that have been transferred to the GSN from one-time funding of about $383,000. So that allows us to do a little bit more and have more permanent resources and staff allocated in next year than we have in the past when these were one-time funding and we would only look at one-time resource or staffing additions. In addition to that, the Indigenous education allocation has increased with the number of enrollment in some of the courses, and that is providing an opportunity to use those additional revenues that are intended for the Indigenous Education Board Action Plan. That those are enveloped funds similar to special education funds that are intended for one particular area. The COVID supports are again one time being provided to school boards. In our case, it's about 9.1 million. This supports our classrooms, learning recovery, the 2 models of learning, which are going to continue into next year, as well as cleaning and ventilation into the schools. Recently, there's been an announcement of additional tutoring supports. About 5.7 million has been assigned. Half of that's about 2.8 to be spent between April and August 31st, so in this current year, and about the other half of 2.8 to be spent for the first part of next year. And of course, that is good news. However, very short time frame, and the implication of learning recovery. The approach is for the full year and not just a few months. So that does pose a challenge. And then supports for student funds have been continued. This is connected to the labor agreements that have been centrally negotiated and expire this year, but there's a continuation into next year in order to create stability in the sector. And for us, that is 6.1 million that is being renewed. So when we look at the special education grant, it is made up of 6 components. Mostly, the biggest part is based on enrollment overall and is meant to support all the students that have various degrees of exceptionalities or needs for support. And some of the other ones are based on particular enrollment or identity or a more of a statistical model for various exceptionalities. And I think we will go into them on the next slide. Just overall, when we look at the special education, the grant itself hasn't gone up quite as much. But when we look at the entire allocation that is enveloped under the special education, which includes some aspects of the other grants that are allocated towards covering expenses under special education, we're looking at a total increase of 4.6 million on the revenue side. Most of that is meant to cover the benchmark on compensation of 1% that has been built in on both the revenue and the expense side. So the next couple of slides just provide a quick summary of what the allocations are meant to cover within the special education grant. The main one, the special education per pupil amount, is based on the overall enrollment, so the total enrollment of the board, and is meant to provide assistance to the majority of students. It also includes assistance for mental health. The differentiated special education needs amount provides, it's based on a statistical model and provides additional support for boards for special education needs based on certain exceptionalities. The special education amount helps provide funding for both the equipment as well as staff, students, and training that is required for special education equipment that is provided to students. The next one on the special incidents portion is additional supports provided for students with exceptionalities that require more than 2 full-time staff in order to address their needs. The Education and Community Partnership Program allocation previously was called the Care, Treatment, Custody, and Correctional allocation, provides support for students that are in government-approved facilities as well as hospitals or other centers. And finally, the behavioral expertise amount and applied behavioral analysis provides some additional support for board level resource professionals to support the multidisciplinary transitions teams. So as I mentioned before, in addition to the special education grant, there's additional areas within the grants for student needs, which is made of many allocations that are meant to complement and support the expenses and the requirements under the special education area. The Pupil Foundation allocation, which is our main grant, is meant to cover everything that's in the classroom, from the teaching staff and teaching support staff to supplies in the classroom and other professionals, including, as highlighted here, professional student services personnel. The cost adjustment and qualification experience grant is meant to provide the grants for the differential between an average salary that is in the formula and the actual salary on the grids that have been where the staff are actually at in their career. So when we put in all of that information, there's a balance. If staff are more experienced, we will get an additional grant. If staff are less experienced and under that average salary, then we get a grant deduction to balance that off. Transportation allocation is meant to support the special education programs, although it's not enveloped in terms of how much of that is directly attributed in the special education grant, but we are, for the purpose of enveloping, looking at those programs where we can differentiate and just providing that towards the enveloping provisions. The support for student funds, which were in the negotiated agreements, have also provided for a portion for special education staffing, which is being maintained, as well as the mental health and well-being grant is being allocated here, as overall the special education revenue is also meant to support mental health beyond the mental health and well-being allocation. And finally, the board administration and governance grant provides the support for the superintendent of education and the office of the superintendent of education, so the administrative side. So when we put all of that on paper in a table, just looking at as again budget to budget from the prior year to the year ahead, we're looking at a total revenue for special education from all of these areas of 115.6 million, so 4.6 million higher than budgeted for last year. So expenses, of course, have also gone up. They've gone up more than the increase in revenue. Overall, not just for special education. So the expenses are, there's large increases in terms of step or grid movements, as well as salary increases and benefit increases. There's additional statutory benefit increases that are not funded, which of course increase our expenses, so they put pressure on the budget. The additional expenses within the special education and mental health area do exceed the additional funding that we've covered in the previous few slides. Utility costs and maintenance and inflation has gone up significantly, increasing our contractual services costs and maintenance quite a bit. And that is just the product of many of this world's economic and market conditions. And the system, yes, the system and maintenance and licensing costs have gone up significantly year over year as well. So in terms of the expenses as they relate to the special education area, the next few slides, I'm not going to go in all the details, but they provide a bit of a breakdown of the overall expenses, and again, compare budget to budget. So in total, we are looking at 5.7 million in additional expenses. And you'll recall when we looked at all the areas of revenue attributed to this envelope, we were about 4.6 million in additional revenue. So expenses are quite a bit higher than that. Year over year, when we do the enveloping provisions for special education, we are looking at about 18 million deficit within this area. You've heard me say this before, that we are consciously making the decision to spend more than the allocation within this area, and while trying to, of course, balance other areas. It is important to note that the 18 million does have to be covered from other areas of the board. So there is a give and take. And there's certainly challenges and priorities that we have to set aside, defer, and delay in order to make this happen. Also, outside of that, we are looking at the transportation, as I mentioned, and the board administration grant that supports that area of the office of the superintendent. So when we look at staffing, so FTE, the full-time equivalent of the positions, and we're looking with regards to special education staffing, we've provided a budget-to-budget comparison, and it does include, again, as I mentioned, the mental health resources as well, the social workers and the child and youth counselors, in addition to all of the other staffing within this department. So year over year, we're looking at about 59 additional resources. It's important to note that through 21-22, additional funding, one-time funding was announced, and some of these positions, most of these positions have been put in place halfway through the year after the budget was passed. We're able to maintain those resources and also make some of those resources permanent into next year. So a few highlights in terms of supports for students that we are able to maintain or add into next year. And they are funded through mixture of board reserves. So the surplus from prior years allocated towards some of these initiatives or staffing, the COVID funding that was provided by the ministry, as well as the tutoring supports that was announced recently. So I won't go through everything. They are listed here. We are fortunate that we can continue to maintain the level of staffing and add some additional staff based on all the additional funding that we've received. So I'm not hearing any questions, and I cannot see you, so I'm assuming I'm just going to move on. Oh, I've heard.
Roxanna, I'm going to ask you a question. It's Alison here. Quick question. In the self-contained, in the revenue slide, in the self-contained, so yeah, let's go back a few slides. No, a self-contained adjustment. Okay, it's gone up by $1.5 million. Is that because we have more self-contained classrooms planned, or is that just they're giving more money for self-containeds?
Yes, so the way self-contained adjustment works, more students that are identified and more classes that are being opened based on requirements will increase this adjustment by decreasing the regular classroom allocation. So there is no additional funding for the board overall. Okay. It's just a reallocation. Okay. And it is going up on the special education side because we are seeing more registrations for students that require a self-contained class. They are not finalized numbers, so we've put in the numbers that we have to date, but the increase is indeed on the special education side because of additional classes that are expected to be open next year. And at the same token, the pupil foundation allocation, which has the classroom support overall for the system, is being brought down by that adjustment.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just on that, when we were on this slide, so we are considering the increase to self-contained classes by about 9. But as I mentioned, that is still in draft form, and it's going to be based on the actual enrollment.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
My question was just tied to that self-contained number. Do we have an idea of where that growth is in self-contained?
So it's at both panels, and I'm not sure if Superintendent Ruddock has a few more details in terms of the actual type of classes being added.
I can start us off, and then I'm going to ask Sean to jump in, because this is something that he is very deeply involved in. But I would say that the largest amount of growth in the self-contained program is in our secondary CPP program, and so we've had to add in that area. And Sean, can you speak to where we're at with our elementary life skills?
Certainly. So
Self-contained, not life skills, sorry.
you are correct, though. Life skills, we are seeing growth, as well as in our LD programs. Those are the two primary areas where we're seeing growth. There is shifts within the system depending on the region. So in some areas we're seeing growth, but then we're seeing some reduction in other regions within the programs. But overall growth, life skills in our LD programs are where we're seeing the most significant.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, I have a question. When you had the slide, the one right before this, and then there's this one, it said for staff, like full-time, yes. It says educational assistants. I totally bypassed that. Never mind. Because I was asking about the increase of that, because I didn't see it in the other part, but I totally went to other staff and didn't see the educational assistants. So I was just curious. Okay, sorry about that. My apologies.
Okay. And remember, they are comparing a time, a certain time, point in time, I should say. And beyond that, there's been grants that have been announced at different times through the year where we were able to add some of the staff at the revised in January. So that position has changed. So with all of those additional grants and additional resources, which we are looking for next year, we do have budget pressures, and we are looking again in using the surplus in order to balance the budget. As I mentioned before, the special education as well as the mental health supports that have been added exceed the level of revenue funding for those areas. In addition, the learning recovery needs in order to continue past December, when the tutoring support funding stops, will put a strain on our resources, as there's no funding to continue. And the focus has been to invest as much as possible in learning recovery, whether it's early intervention, learning disability, etc., but just focusing overall on that learning recovery needs. Supply costs have gone up, and as you can imagine, due to all the restrictions and isolation requirements and all of those mandates, it has put a lot of strain on our ability to secure coverage across the system. and all the additional positions that we're adding in terms of tutoring supports and so forth also draw from our supply pool, leaving less staff available to cover absenteeisms overall across the system. The virtual school registrations have been quite lower than the past couple of years, which means that our staffing ratio to the class average is not efficient. So we are supplementing sections and staff in order to have a viable program in the virtual schools. Facility costs have increased as well, more than the grant for that school operations allocation, which is meant to cover the maintenance and operations of our schools and facilities and groundkeeping. And another very big, a few $1 million that are unfunded are the increases in statutory benefits that have been going up year over year in the last couple of years. So that unfortunately there is no match on the funding side, and the cost is incurred by the employer in full. So in terms of next steps, we are just finalizing where we are with the draft budget, with some of the initiatives and additional resources that we can propose, some of the concessions we need to make, the use of surplus within compliance. And when we talk about compliance, the ministry is allowing school boards to use up to 1% of essentially the grants of student needs allocation. So that portion of our revenue, for us, it's about 7.5 million, represents that 1%. So we can use up to 7.5 million of reserves in order to complement and support the system. And we're going to be providing more information to trustees at the committee of the whole meeting, which is a public meeting. Then with all the feedback, we're going to put together the draft budget for the first week in June for the board meeting. And I believe that was our last slide. Happy to take any other questions.
So are there any questions at this time? I had one while I'm waiting for others to put their hand up. Obviously, we haven't heard about PPM 81. Is that your point there, one of the risks where we had different work being undertaken by professionals or downloading of professionals' work onto school staff? Yeah. So that's obviously a big, we don't know what the impact is. We're assuming no money. Okay, all right.
Yes, that is it. There hasn't been any mention of funding. And I know Superintendent Ruddock and her colleagues have come together with a plan. That's part of some of the initiatives that we are considering funding through surplus in terms of what would some of those resources, training requirements, staffing requirements may look like. Having said that, through the year, there may be additional information, there may be additional funding and direction. At this point in time, not having that, we have to assume there is not, and therefore determine what that need may be for the budget.
Yeah, Colette?
I would like to add, though, that at this point, the draft PPM remains in consultation. So we haven't received a finalized PPM for implementation at this point. So given the timing of the election, I don't imagine we're going to hear anything before the end of this school year, which one would hope will delay any kind of implementation beyond September. So right now it's just status quo with PPM 81.
Okay, great. Yeah, any other questions? I had another one. Obviously, VSS. You mentioned before that the numbers are low. You made a comment there about how you're going to augment VSS. I just wasn't quite sure what's going to be happening there in order to make that viable.
So what I meant is that with very low numbers of students, I believe the VSS, we refer to the secondary virtual school. And I forget the actual numbers. I believe it's around 300 students. I see Colette shaking her head. So around 300 students across 4 grades. So each grade has to have a number of sections that are required in order for them to be able to complete the year or to graduate, which means we have a minimum number of sections that we have to provide, and the funding for those require additional students, and we are funding that through the COVID supports that was provided to the school board. So we have to compensate for the low numbers because they don't generate as many teachers as they would in a larger school. However, we ensure that there is sufficient sections required in order to complete the year as well as graduate.
Okay, great, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Lisa.
I'm just wondering, with in terms of the COVID supports, is that definite? Like, is it like a known fact that those dollars are coming in? And secondly, that we will definitely be having virtual school next year?
Yes, it is. So they've been already allocated on a board by board level, and the 9.1 million is our own allocation. It's for the entire board, of course. So it's meant to cover all of our needs. And it also required in the memorandum that virtual schools be provided next year as an option.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm not sure if we've lost Allison, or Allison, are you still there?
Oh, sorry, I had my mute on. I was just wondering there about James. James?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's been anything, any studies looked at the virtual learning about, is there ways to make it efficient, more cost effective, or anything like that? Has there been any, the question is, has there been any kind of review of, online virtual learning classes that look into the cost, how cost effective it is?
Colette.
Yeah, that's a great question, James. And it was a discussion that we had as a senior team when we received the number of students that selected the remote learning option. And how can we make it, a viable and meaningful option for our students, and yet cost effective given it's so few students. So this year we have an entire secondary school that is staffed with, office staff and principal and vice principals and guidance and student success, all, just solely attached to the virtual school. Next year, we've attached the remote classes or the virtual classes to an existing small secondary school at a bricks and mortar, so at LC McGill, because it's a new school. It only has grades 9 and 10, so about 500 in-person learners. So the virtual students will be attached to that school, and so all of the support staff for LC McGill in person will also support the remote students. So we've really reduced the cost of running the virtual secondary school this year by attaching it to an in-person secondary school. I don't know, Roxanna, if you have anything else to add to that from a financial side.
You're on mute, Roxanna. There you go. Yeah.
quite a bit of efficiencies resulting from that. I think the bigger question is, provincially, have we looked at the efficiency of those schools and at what point they're viable or not viable? That may be a different question that we cannot answer. But we've done as much as we could to make it, one, viable, and two, as cost efficient as we could.
Great. It sounds like a sensible option given the constraints that you're in. So that sounds great. Any other questions? No? Well, we'll thank Roxanna for coming to present to us. As usual, there's a lot of unknowns still for you, but luckily the numbers came through a lot earlier and I guess made the process a little bit easier this year. So thank you for presenting that to us. You've obviously heard our feedback, but be interested to see what the final numbers turn out to be. Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for your team for joining us.
Thank you as well.
All right, take care then. Bye. Okay, so now we're going to move on to item 2.2. And if Candice is here and has her internet working, which looks like she does, we're going to have a presentation on community living.
Yes, I just want to warn everybody that my internet's been finicky tonight, so I apologize if I freeze or if I log out. Am I able to share my screen, and how do I do so?
I
just
think
hit present
you should
now?
be able to.
Do I just hit present?
Try to help you.
Do I just hit present now? Is that what it is?
That's right.
Okay.
And then you want to click on the present tab and go to the tab that you want to present.
Little arrow in a box.
Sorry, Colette. So I'm sorry, everybody. So I go to present, and then is it your entire screen, a window, or a tab? Which one do I hit?
You want to click on tab.
Tab, okay.
And then you just pick the tab that you want to present.
I'm not getting my option up. I did send it to Marta. I don't know if she could pull it up for me. Is that possible?
Yeah, either Marta, or if Marta wants to send it to me, I can do that as well.
Sorry, guys. I'm a Zoom girl.
So
I'll get it up for you, Candice. Just one moment.
Thank you.
While Marta's doing that, if I could just take a moment and introduce Marta. We welcomed Marta into the department. I think maybe it's been 2 weeks. She's jumped in like she's been there forever, but we're very appreciative of having her with us for a short period of time. I think she's here until August, the end of August. So yeah, welcome to Marta. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Thank you. And am I able to control, have any controls, Marta, or no?
Not because
No.
Marta's
Okay.
sharing her screen. It'll be her. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks for helping me out, Marta. So I'm Candice Keane, and I work for Community Living Burlington, and you can switch the screen, Marta. And I'm, no, that's not us. And I'm really actually happy to be here and be able to talk about CLB, because I think a lot of people have heard of us. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, you guys have homes in the community, and they don't really understand fully what we do. So I like to have these opportunities to talk about all the wonderful services that we have. I'm just going to keep going, and if Marta can get up the PowerPoint, great. If not, I'll just keep talking about.
Sounds great. And Candice is, I say, having a little bit of difficulty up with the rain. So we'll hope she's back in a moment. Okay, great. Thank you, Marta.
Are you able to see my screen?
We can, Marta. Yeah, we just lost Candice for a moment. So we're hoping Candice can get back in. We'll give her a couple of minutes, and then if not, we'll maybe move into the next item on the agenda. It's only a 10-minute item, and then we can come back to Candice as well. We all know about tech issues in the modern world. So what I think I'll do in the interest of time is we will, Marta, if you could take down the presentation, and we'll move just into the next agenda item. And then when we get Candice back, we'll be able to have that presentation. So the next item, 2.3, is basically just an opportunity for anybody who wanted to for us to open the floor and discuss any items that came out of the special education plan that we felt weren't addressed. We had a little bit of time. The plan is not going to be voted on until next month, I think. And so just to open it up to some of the organizations to see, how they felt about supporting the plan. As a note, the Learning Disabilities Association of Halton Hamilton has agreed to support the special education plan this year. We're very impressed with the changes that are taking place and the drive to support students with learning disabilities and ADHD. And so while not everything is perfect and probably never will be, we certainly are very grateful for the efforts that are being made. We recognize more changes will be coming after the Ontario Human Rights Report. And so for this year, we will support the special education plan. So I just wanted everybody to know that we will not be submitting a minority report. So, but we wanted to see if anybody else had any questions or concerns or things that came up after you left the meeting last time. Again, last year, ABC submitted a minority report, again, just trying to check in and make sure that ABC had an opportunity to have their voice heard as well. Jen.
And sure, I can talk to that a bit. So I think from an ABC association standpoint, we still have concerns related to our continued decline in early identification, primarily tied to our primary kind of gifted age groups. One of the things that I would love some more information on tied to the education plan, and I've alluded to this on the side as well, is just information around the numbers for giftedness. With the document talks about it holistically for elementary. We know today that our standardized testing picks up that for our higher grades, but really trying to understand what's happening in the grades 1 to 3. And then even from an identification standpoint, what's happening for testing? Is it the board? Is it parents doing it privately? Because we continue to have concerns around equity as well. So would love to keep the dialogue going on this one to see what we can build out, just knowing that we continue to have parents' questions and concerns come to us around this topic.
Colette.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jen. We will certainly look into the number of students who have been assessed through the problem-solving pathway. It will take us some time to gather that information, and I imagine it's of interest to SEAC across all of our exceptionalities. So we will try to bring the data, not just around gifted assessments, but around all of our assessments to SEAC. We don't, so that said, we will do that, and whether we can have that for June or whether it will be early next year, I'm not sure how complicated it will be to pull this data. So, but I will do my best to get it for you this school year. But we don't track the number of outside assessments. So once a student is assessed and the report is shared with us, our psychology team opens a file, so to speak, and whether a student was assessed by our staff member or by an outside agency, a psych file is a psych file. So I'm not sure that I'll be able to get that kind of very specific data around outside assessments for you, but I'll certainly look at bringing some data around assessments and exceptionalities to SEAC.
Okay, thank you.
Do any of the other associations have any concerns building off the budget that we've heard today? Anything that they would like to have brought to the trustees' attention prior to voting on the special education plan? No. Okay. Well, that's you know, we just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to have time to digest the conversation and to share. Having said that, I don't think we have Candice back yet, do we? Can't see Candice yet. So we'll move on to the next item, which is that over the last month, we've received quite a few letters from other school boards and other SEAC committees, and those were sent out to you. Some of them were sent out earlier with the agenda package, and then a couple more came in only yesterday or the day before, and Marta sent those out to you, and thank you for that, Marta. Really, the conversation to have here is, we feel that they are relevant to us and our board? Do we agree with them, and do we want to put in a similar letter, or we're okay to leave it with the boards that have put forward their proposals so far to the ministry? So as I say there, I think there are 4 letters, and I'll just quickly go through those. So we had we had 2 letters from the York Catholic District School Board, one built around budgeting. So for last year, the special incident portion claim funding, which is the additional funding given to students, I believe, with more severe exceptionalities who need additional support. I think that's my correct understanding of it. But there was a clawback. And so the government, so this was actually 2-3 years ago, the government put some funding in place and then clawed it back. What York Catholic is asking is that the minister reevaluate the true costs associated with providing special education for these more complex needs of students with special needs, and build a more appropriate SIP funding program. So what does anybody think? Does anybody have any thoughts, comments? Is it relevant to us? James?
Yeah, I think it's relevant that it could be, I don't know, restrained or constrained or somewhat if you're pulling staff out to look for the needs of certain students who may be coming to school that are, you know, in ill health or needing nursing of some kind, or you know, there is a shortage of EA staff. We talked about this before, where you know, some EAs are required to do duties that they're not really trained to do. So I think that's what this letter's, from what I could see, is trying to you know, address that situation that can arise.
Okay, yeah. Who else? Colette.
So the SIP funding, just to clarify, the SIP funding is funding that we apply for students with significant behavioral needs, where their behavior poses a risk to themselves, to staff, or to other students, such that there needs to be 2 or more adults with the student at all times. So that it really isn't, to James's point, it really isn't getting to the needs around the healthcare services that some students need, but really those really small number of students that have extraordinary behavior needs that poses a safety risk. So I don't know if Sean can speak specifically to the number of SIP grants we have submitted. I don't know if you have that kind of on the top of your head there, Sean, but it is an annual process that we review and apply for.
Off the top of my head, roughly, I want to say 90, but I will confirm that for the next meeting.
Okay. And do you, I mean, bearing in mind their letter, do you feel that the SIP grant that you receive is appropriate for the level of support that is required?
Well, I would say that our challenge, as you just heard from Roxanna, is that we are almost 19 million overspent in special education services. So ultimately, we feel that we are not appropriately funded across all levels of support in order to maintain the service that we provide. So I guess that's a roundabout way of answering your question, but it is a challenge for us, and I know that it's a conversation that Roxanna will continue to raise with me around how are we going to address this $19 million gap between what we're funded to offer and what we actually offer. And when I look at our special education plan and we talk about our supports for students, I can't say that there is somewhere where we would like to see more cuts to service or reduced access to programming or specialized supports. And so we need to then advocate, I suppose, for the funding source rather than the service cut.
So I guess, I mean, I don't know what others think, but based on what I'm hearing and what York is sort of outlining, I don't think there would be any harm if the government were to reanalyze what it actually costs to look after a student with these extra supports, and perhaps come up with a more realistic or even slightly more realistic funding model for them. So we could write a letter and at least request that they look at the funding model for that, bearing in mind that our board dramatically overfunds special education, which we're fully behind the board on, but what that's really telling us is that they are being underfunded for the work that they have to do. Does anybody agree, disagree? Kathy?
I do agree. Being in the position that I am in with PO, like being an EA, we find that we don't have not enough funding or supports for the students that we do work with, even with the high like behaviors, but even like with sometimes with special needs, with medical issues, we're like waiting to do stuff, but we don't have enough funding to support them within the class. So we need more funding for them. That makes sense.
Yep. James.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting to. Like, we often find like, the EAs that have the extra training with attending to extra needs of the students. Those are sometimes are often our EAs. They're dealing with behavioral issues as well. And all it takes is one smack in the head and then they're out. And then it's got a ripple effect that, we just can't get staff that have had that training.
So I'm going to put forward, would anybody like to put forward a motion that I write a letter in support of York Catholic?
Oh, I would
Okay.
support a motion
James?
for that. Yes.
Lucille, you'd second?
I do.
Okay, so does anybody, let's just do it the other way. Does anybody oppose or want to abstain from a vote, a motion to send a letter of support for extra funding for SIP grants? Okay, not seeing any, then that motion is passed unanimously. Okay, the second letter we had from York Catholic was the fact that many students with complex medical needs have a shortage of healthcare providers and do not have the nursing support necessary to allow them to attend school, and as such are being treated inequitably by not being able to get into school because they don't have the medical support to do this. Obviously, this links a little bit with PPM 81. I'm sure the government would argue that, well, if the educators did it, they could come to school and everything would be fine. But I guess York Catholic is asking that we put in immediate and accessible solution to allow children to access at-school nursing support in order to be able to attend school. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? I'm part of the parents with multiple exceptionalities for medical needs for kids, and a lot of parents, because my son also has some medical, but like a lot of parents are struggling because they want to send their child to school, but there is no nurse for them for the medical side of it. So they too feel like it's not an equitable thing for their child, because they feel like they obviously they do deserve to be in school, but if there's no nurse, there's that safety risk for the child, especially for us EAs. We're not trained in certain things. We can give like water bolus, we know how to do like handle seizures, but giving meds to say stop a seizure or G-tube feeds, we're not able to do that. So there's that equitable thing to that. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments? Rebecca.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that they should, they have a right to be at school. They have a right to an education, and we need to ask the government to find some more funding to support them. I'm in agreement for sure.
Okay. Any other comments? Diane.
I'm just wondering if anyone has contacted the Ministry of Health on this issue. So I'm concerned that education is funding everything, and if it's nursing concerns, shouldn't the Ministry of Health be involved?
Yeah, so would probably maybe our letter should be directed to the two of them. Let me just check with their letter. What did they send it? They sent it to the Minister of Health and the Minister of Education. Basically saying that updates. So basically, apparently there's an update that prevents parents or guardians of students with complex medical needs from attending school. Due to a shortage of nurses. So basically they can't find access for the funding to get the nurses to allow their children to be able to access school. So yes, it's a letter to be directed to be sorted out between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. So again, would anybody want to put forward a motion that we write a letter to the two ministers?
I'll do that.
I can. Oh, sorry.
So we got Diane proposing and Kathy seconding. And Sarah?
I think it's important to make clear in the letter that the solution is not the suggested amendments to PPM 81.
Yeah.
Sorry, sort of so that they're not under the impression that, yeah, we're okay then with EAs doing it or parents having to come in.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Thank you.
So does anybody have anybody want to vote against or abstain? Yes, we'll have Candice next time. That'll be great. So anybody want to vote against or abstain, please make themselves known. I take that as no, in which case that motion is passed unanimously. Okay, and then I had two more letters which we sent to you. Maybe it was three. I don't know how many we've got here. So there was one from Near North District School Board, which has expressed concern, or was a letter of support for concerns expressed by other school boards regarding online learning resources and the platforms used to access the resources. Just talking about their rural settings and the fact that some students do not have convenient access to wireless connections, and they need to have resources that are accessible to them. So Colette, how are our students doing in terms of accessibility with online learning now that we are hopefully coming out the other side of COVID?
To be honest, we haven't talked about this as a senior team since the fall, but all in all, I would say that Halton is in very good shape in terms of access. There are certain pockets in the north where either Wi-Fi is very expensive or not easily available. But I know that the infrastructure investments were underway late fall. In fact, I remember Trustee Garrett's being in a board meeting with the noise outside of her house because they were putting in the high-speed cable. So I believe, all in all, in Halton, we're in pretty good shape.
Okay. So does anybody feel that we need to write a letter outlining our need for this or our support? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on. Oh, James?
Yeah, I don't think it's really one of our issues per
Yep.
se.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so I'm not seeing any need for that one from the group, so that's great. So then I've got, there we go. We got Senior Greenstone District School Board, which I don't even, oh, sorry, Superior Greenstone. That's why I couldn't tell where it was. They have actually raised an interesting point in their letter. Basically, under the COVID regulations, we've been allowed to have meetings online. And they are asking that be continued even after the pandemic. For them, it's it really is an accessibility issue that many of their members have to travel significant distances, and they have 15 schools dispersed over 45,000 square miles. So the ability to get everybody together is very challenging for them. I guess for our group, how do we feel about having virtual meetings rather than in-person meetings? Right now, if that regulation is removed, they will have to go back to all. So they'd have to have meetings occur in person. So what do we think, Tracy?
Hi, thanks very much. And I just wanted to let you know that I joined a while ago. My apologies about being on screen when I stood up. It's been a long night of sitting. But to this subject matter, I think a lot of the points that they make in their letter are really great in terms of inclusion. No matter if we have a large geography, which we do, not the same, but we do. And it could really help people to, I think, start and maintain their participation, to have that opportunity. And at some point, it may be a hybrid model where some of us are in the boardroom and some of us are not able to be there. But I think it's an opportunity that the pandemic has opened up. And for this group, I think it could be really great to continue.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
I basically just want to echo what Tracy was saying. I think in the spirit of inclusion and barrier-free access, I think if we can plan for things to be or allow for things to be barrier-free to begin with and not sort of as an afterthought, I think anything that moves in that direction, I think is a benefit to me. And I think, yeah, for those of us having 3 young children, I think it would probably allow for those evenings that are crazy for me to still be able to attend. So partly convenience, but I think really overall, I think in the spirit of inclusion, I would definitely be in support of this.
Okay. James, did you have a comment? Was it James?
Yes, I just think that I have felt or seen or perceived, maybe it's, I'm not sure which, but I do feel like there's been a little bit better participation. And I think if it's going to be mandated that it has to be in person, I think it would be good to support this and not it should be an option at the very least. I mean, I like a lot of people like in-person meetings. I like in-person meetings myself, but I think it should be an option and something we should consider.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds great. I mean, yeah. From my personal perspective, I agree. It'd be nice to meet everybody. Maybe having to get together once a year, and we all get to know one another. But I agree. We've seen higher participation, and I'm sure it's been easier for staff to be able to present to us if they're at home and can still do a presentation. And so I do think we've had higher turnout by being online. So yeah, anybody else want to share? Colette, what is the board doing? Are they going back to regular meetings?
I'd actually ask Trustee
Okay,
Tracy.
Hi, so the intent was to return to the boardroom this month at some point. There are some renovations taking place. I think there might have been a leak in the ceiling. So the intent is to return, but under a hybrid model. So for example, if somebody can't make it and we have that scenario playing out at the meeting tomorrow night, we have some people who are on business travel and other travel that will join us that way. And that's always been an option. So we'll have both.
Okay. So yeah, Colette.
And I was just going to add that if I recall correctly, the amendment to the regulation to host virtual board meetings and virtual SEAC meetings is set to expire in October. So it is a temporary regulation at this point, unless that changes.
Yes. So they're requesting that it be made permanent. Yeah. So does anybody want to put forward? I mean, we can put forward an option that there is the choice for us to decide whether it's in-person or virtual. I think that having that flexibility to meet the geographical needs of your community, whether it's in Thunder Bay or downtown Toronto, could have very different models. But really what we're all looking for is participation and engagement in as inclusive way as possible. So perhaps, I could write a letter that would indicate that we support the extension of the regulation with the flexibility to be either in-person, hybrid, or virtual, depending on our members' choice. Would anybody like to move a motion? Sarah?
Yeah, I'll move the motion.
Anybody want a second?
I will second.
James? Does anybody want to oppose, abstain? No, none being seen. At this time, the motion is passed unanimously. Okay, and I'm being cognizant of the time because we've got a few things to get through still. So we're now at item 3.0, see a question period. Does anybody have any questions right now they want to raise? Jen.
I just have a question. It's a parent question that's come to me that I'm hoping probably Colette can answer. We're getting some questions around virtual learning for next year, specifically around gifted self-contained for elementary. I've heard parents have gotten confirmation about grades 5, 6, and 7, but I have 2 parents that are asking about some of the earlier grades. So I was curious where they can go to find out this information, if it's hasn't been communicated yet, but will be. I just wasn't sure where to direct them.
Thanks for that question, Jen. So schools should have been communicating with families last week around the remote classes. So I am hoping at this point that all families have heard from their schools if they are impacted. But due to the low numbers in elementary remote learning, we aren't able to offer all of the self-contained options. So we are running a life skills class in the remote environment, but that is the only self-contained class that had enough numbers to make a viable class. So there are, and Sean, I'm going to ask you to jump in if I get this wrong, but there are 2 students that are in an LD self-contained, and so that does not make a viable option to run that class. And we had 8 students across 8 grades also selecting gifted self-contained. And so we obviously can't run an 8th grade class. And so that wasn't,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that wasn't a viable option either. And so schools were reaching out to those families to talk to them about what their options are in terms of staying in the remote class with resource support, with withdrawal support, or if that kind of changed their minds, that the in-person self-contained option would still be available to them. But yes, due to really our numbers, we've had to take a look at what we can offer. Sean, do you want to add anything to that?
Only that we've had difficulty reaching some of the families over the past couple of days. This just began early last week. So if you know those families, you can have them reach out directly to me and I can follow up with them. That's not a problem. They should be hearing, if not tomorrow, by Thursday at the very latest, though. And if you hear after that, please direct them to me.
Okay, I will do that. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Catherine. Kathy?
Yes, pressed the wrong button. So I was talking to a parent. She's coming from California, and she was asking me questions because I was just helping her, you need to make sure you have all your documents when you register your child. But she's having concerns because in California, she has a one-on-one for her son. And I said, I know there's a rating scale where you get a one-on-one. So I was just preparing her for that. But she wants to know how when she registers her child, because I know every situation is different. For me, I was lucky I got my son from the best schools rated to life skills, so it's the support of the CERT and people from within the board. If there's a particular contained class, her son can't handle a lot of students in one class, and going into grade 4 next year. So she was just wondering what else what other process does she need to have to make sure if there's an EA for him starting September, and I could pass along the information. I think that.
So Kathy, you're cutting out a little bit there. So
she has all the reports. She was like, sorry, my internet's kind of sucky right now. I shouldn't say that. Sorry.
It's a theme.
Or my husband is snoring in the other room. I didn't say that. But so her son is going into grade 4. She was wanting to know the process to get her son to make sure he has an EA, but I remind her of the rating scale. It all is based on a certain criteria. But she was wondering area of Halton, but focusing on Oakville. And she's worried that her son might not handle a big size class. I'm not sure what else I can tell her, but he has autism and there's other needs going on. He has one-on-one in California and all that. So I don't know what else I can what else I can tell her. Is there any information I can pass along to her?
So I would ask her if you're able to connect the parent to Sean as a starting point, and we can certainly help with the registration process and what are the documents that the parent can share with the school in order to initiate the process to find out what the right supports are, what the right programs are, what are our options depending on kind of the full profile of the student. So, because each kind of registration process is so unique to the individual student, we really like to kind of manage those with really kind of curtailed to the individual needs. So there's no one size fits all process, so to speak. But we're happy to support.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Okay, so at this stage we're at Marta, do we have any questions from the public?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. So we're now at item 4.0, communications to SEAC, starting with Colette's report.
Oops. So just a couple of quick things for you this evening. We have just finished reviewing the applications for the tutoring supports through the community organizations and associations. And we're reaching out to the recipients this week. We did kind of send widespread invitations to organizations and all of course, our SEAC associations. But we did only have 4 organizations submit requests, which, I guess the positive to that is that we are able to support all 4 organizations that applied. And we're just in the process of finalizing those details, and then we'll be communicating out those opportunities to families. So our goal is to launch all of our offerings to families across both the board offerings and our community organizations the week of May 24th. And then as Roxanna mentioned in her budget presentation, there is a second phase of the funding, and that is from September to December, because this first phase of the funding that we just allocated out has to be spent by August 31st. For that pot of money, we are doing a request for proposals because we do have a little bit more time. And so we want to send out the invitation to any interested not-for-profit organization, not just the ones that we have a working relationship with, which is with the focus of our first phase of funding. So that RFP is just about ready to go out. I think it's going to go out by the end of this week. And as I say, it will be open to anyone in the community, not-for-profit, that would like to apply. Sean, I'm going to ask you if you could give an update on the Special Education Services Summer Learning Opportunities.
Thank you. We're still finalizing, but right now we will be offering sessions in July. So the first 2 weeks of July will be block 1, and the second 2 sessions of July will be block 2. Both of those sessions are 8 days, so Monday to Thursday, which allows for families to have the long weekends and enjoy the summer and the good weather that's ahead of us. We will be putting out by the 18th information to schools and through the schools to the families for the programs we're going to be offering, similar to the past 2 years, programs for life skills, LD, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, autism, gifted. We have some specific for students in CPP. And we are hoping to have the registration completed by early June and get the staffing in place. I should point out, sorry, in addition, those sessions, there's a morning and an afternoon, so it's only a half day, which still gives the students a chance to enjoy their summer through the week.
And then on top of that, this summer, we're also looking to complete some additional psychoeducational assessments, as well as some speech and language assessments. We have set aside funds in our own budget for this work. And in addition to that, the ministry has given us funding to address our wait lists. And so we are going to put out a request for proposals to private providers because our own staff can't do all of the assessments in the summer that we would like to accomplish. And so we are putting a call out for any private providers to conduct those assessments on our behalf. So that also is going to go out sometime this month as the funding has to be spent by December 31st as well. But we are looking forward to taking a good hit at our wait lists with that funding. And the last thing on my list was the remote learning for next year, but I've already talked about the self-contained offerings in elementary, and we also talked about the secondary model embedded into an in-person school for efficiencies. So that's everything I have for you this evening, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah, any questions from anybody? No? Okay. So at this time, do we have any association reports? No, and I'm going to break the habit of a lifetime. I'm not going to make a report either. So nobody? Okay, we will move on then. So trustees report. Oh, Kathy. Kathy, are you there? Kathy, you've got your hand up, yeah?
Yes.
You can speak, yeah? We actually can't hear you, Kathy.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Okay.
I'll be fine. Okay. With Voice, we have a conference coming up this weekend. We have, and you can still register online. It's great for educators, working with those who are deaf and hard of hearing. There's guest speakers. It's going to be all virtual because of the pandemic. With our chapter that Aaron and I are with, we had this past weekend, we had an outdoor picnic in Milton. We had some families come in and have pizza, and we're hoping to do it again this month to get really all the families back out. So we try to reach out to maybe the deaf and hard of hearing itinerants, and if possible, to invite new families coming that are part of the Halton District School Board. We love to have new families come out and meet others. So
Sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So this stage then, as I say, it's now the trustees report.
Okay, thank you. And hello, everybody. Through you, Madam Chair. Just a brief report tonight. Happy Education Week to everybody. And thank you for all of the events that you are hosting in your organizations, and hopefully you can check out what HDSB is doing as well. This month, we're also recognizing Asian Heritage, Dutch Heritage, Jewish Heritage, and South Asian Heritage Months. You heard a budget presentation tonight from Superintendent Nagoy. Trustees are also moving right into the center of budget season. And I'm going to provide for you in the report a link to a recent report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And it shows that the investments per student has decreased over the last 4 years. And it includes a series of recommendations that might just be some interesting reading. And of course, we juxtapose that with the increasing needs. So it's going to be another interesting budget season. Funding has been received for Milton number 13, and the groundbreaking for Milton number 12 took place last week, and Trustee Garrett was involved in that. So there is some new school infrastructure happening in certainly the high growth area in Milton. This next item is a follow-up to our last report last month. And on April 22nd, trustees launched Reimagine Forward, an initiative meant to bring people together virtually to share stories and ideas about possible big moves to reimagine public education. Just wanted to let you know that so far we've had hundreds of participants, thousands of visitors, and you and all members of your organizations and your colleagues and family, including your students, are invited to participate by May 23rd. You can find all of that action at engagehdsb.ca. And before I turn it over to Joanna, I just wanted to also encourage you to remember the Inspire Awards. You can find the application process at hdsb.ca/inspire. And it's a great time of year to be thinking about volunteers, staff, or students that have inspired you in the work that you do. And I'll turn it over to Joanna for the rest of our report.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple of updates related to our student trustees and the Student Senate. So tomorrow evening, trustees will consider a report about asking the minister to give student trustees the right to move and second motions. This has been a long-standing goal of the Provincial Student Trustee Association and one that is gaining some momentum across the province this year. The second update is related to the Senate. The Halton District School Board Senate is in the process of planning their annual Halton Youth Leadership Symposium. This symposium is aimed at grade 7 and 8 students and will offer a range of workshops. And once again, this year, this symposium will be held virtually. And speaking about Inspire Award, the Student Senate Environmental Subcommittee is working on creating a student environmental award in line with the student declared climate emergency that took place last year. So the Senate is working out the details and they hope to launch the award and the process of nominations later this month. So more on that later as it unfolds. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions for the trustees? Okay, so this time it's time for the committee reports. I'll go through a list of our standing committees and ask for any updates. Parent Involvement Committee. Nope. Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
No update.
Okay, thank you. Equity Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee.
No update.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And the Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy Steering and Advisory Committee. No, I think Yarlene was on that committee, so she's not here this evening. Okay, so there are no updates at this time. We're now at item 5.0, next agenda or order paper. Are there any items that committee members would like to add to the upcoming agenda? Obviously, we will try and get Candice on to speak about community living, which would be great. Is there anything else we need to cover? Next session will be our last session of the year, which seems unbelievable. I'll go through the list, but I think most things will have been covered by then. We will have a vote on the as to whether we I think we have a vote on whether we approve this special education plan, so that needs to take place. But other than that, if anybody has any suggestions of items that they would like to see discussed on the agenda, please either contact myself or Lucille, and we can see about getting that on the agenda. Lucille, yes.
I just wanted to remind everybody that we will be looking for nominees for the committee for September. So if you could identify yourself at the June meeting, we'll be very pleased to have your nomination. Thank you.
Yeah. So so again, looking at any changeover, that people are very welcome to apply for positions. Diane.
Oh, just a reminder that we don't vote to support, to approve the special ed plan.
Yeah.
We support it or not support it.
Correction noted, Diane. Yeah, that's right. So so please, if you have any thoughts about stepping into our roles, would be very happy to help support you in that. So please have a think about any positions you might want to take on. Other than that, I think it is now item 6.0 that great item, adjournment, and it is 8:58. So we've done it again. So I would like to thank everybody for the time and effort they put in again this evening, and everybody's contribution, and thank again the staff for presenting this evening, answering your questions. And I look forward to welcoming you next month for our final SEAC of the year. Okay, thank you. Our meeting is adjourned, and have a wonderful evening.